Hey y'all, welcome to Anatomy 2169 lab. Today we're going to go over the endocrine system. The endocrine system is responsible for regulating homeostasis using hormones. By the end of this lab, you will be able to identify the major endocrine glands of the body, the major hormones and which glands secrete them, and the functions of these hormones. We will also go over the histology of a selection of endocrine glands. So this image shows the endocrine organs of the human body. Starting at the top, we have the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. And they can all be found within the brain. And these are considered the control center for the other endocrine glands in the body. In the throat, we have our thyroid and parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands are located on the dorsal or backside of the large thyroid gland. You may also hear some people describe the thyroid gland as having a butterfly shape. Next, we have the thymus in the chest, which has some immune function. The adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys, and in between the kidneys, we have our pancreas. And then lastly, depending on an individual's sex, females will have ovaries and males will have testes in the groin area. This figure highlights the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus acts as a bridge linking the nervous system and the endocrine system. The hypothalamus mainly functions to maintain homeostasis in the body. It responds to a variety of environmental signals such as blood pressure, body temp, hunger, hormone levels, and more. At the top of the figure, hypothalamic neurons of the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei, and neurons in the ventral hypothalamus extend directly into the posterior pituitary gland. Hormones created in the hypothalamus are sent into the posterior pituitary through a connecting stalk called the infundibulum, and that's where they'll be stored. These hormones are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Now let's take a close look at the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary glands. The posterior pituitary gland is also called the neural hypophysis and is made up of mainly nerves. Because it is mainly composed of nerves, the posterior pituitary is only capable of storing and secreting hormones. It does not produce them. The production of the posterior pituitary hormones takes place in the hypothalamus. The anterior pituitary is also called the adrenal hypophysis and is connected to the hypothalamus by the hypophyseal portal system. The hypothalamus will send hormone signals down the portal system to the anterior pituitary gland, and special secretory cells within the adrenal hypophysis will begin producing new hormones and release them into the blood circulation. Now we'll start looking at specific hormones and their function. First, it's important to know the two types of hormones. There are tropic hormones and non-tropic hormones. Tropic hormones are hormones that used to communicate with other endocrine glands. Non-tropic hormones are used to communicate and stimulate non-endocrine tissues and cells. So next we'll have a couple of charts. If you see a red star next to a hormone, you will need to know its function in addition to the tissue. For all the hormones we cover, you will need to know whether it is tropic or non-tropic and know the abbreviations for each. The hormones with the red star, you will need to know its function in target tissue or structure. You do not need to know the stimulus for release for the hormones. These first six hormones are all hormones that are released by the anterior pituitary gland. Four of these hormones are tropic hormones. Those are the thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and adrenocorticotropic hormone. The last two hormones on this chart are non-tropic hormones, and they are growth hormone and prolactin. TSH targets the thyroid gland to stimulate the secretion of thyroid hormones T3 and T4, which will have a direct effect on your metabolism. FSH and LH target the ovaries and testes, which will trigger the release of sex-specific hormones that will then lead to the development of specific sex characteristics. ACTH targets the adrenal cortex within the adrenal glands and will stimulate the release of glucocorticoids and androgens. Growth hormone stimulates the growth and protein synthesis throughout the body. Mobilizes fats and tells the body to store glucose. Prolactin targets the mammary glands and breast tissue and stimulates lactation. These next two hormones are released by the posterior pituitary. Remember that the posterior pituitary does not synthesize these hormones, but only stores them and releases them after being produced by the hypothalamus. Oxytocin targets the uterus and mammary glands and stimulates uterine contractions during childbirth and milk ejection in lactating mothers. Don't confuse milk ejection with milk production seen with prolactin. ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, targets the kidneys and stimulates the kidneys to reabsorb water and decrease urine output if our body detects we are dehydrated. These next hormones are hormones of the thyroid and parathyroid glands. T3 and T4 are collectively referred to as thyroid hormone, or just TH, and are released by the thyroid and target almost every cell and tissue in the body. They are responsible for increasing the basal metabolic rate and regulate tissue growth and development. Calcitonin targets bone tissue and is responsible for controlling blood calcium levels. Parathyroid hormone, or PTH, also targets bone tissue in addition to the kidney. It is the counterpart of calcitonin and acts to increase blood calcium, stimulating the kidneys to reabsorb more calcium and convert vitamin D into calcitriol to increase calcium absorption in the intestines. The adrenal gland is comprised of two different layers. You have the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. Within the adrenal cortex, there are three distinct zones. And those are the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa secretes mineralocorticoids, the main one being aldosterone, and targets the kidney. The main function of aldosterone is to promote sodium and water reabsorption and potassium secretion in urine. The zona fasciculata secretes glucocorticoids, the main one being cortisol. Cortisol is an anti-stress hormone and causes the increased breakdown of fats and proteins to support blood sugar levels, promote stress resistance, and inhibits immune response. The last zone of the adrenal cortex is the zona reticularis, and is responsible for secreting gonadocorticoids, the main ones being androgens, the precursor to our sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen. The adrenal medulla is made up of chromatin cells that will produce catecholamines such as epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine. These hormones are used to prepare the body's flight or flight response, increasing heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, and sweating. The pancreas is important in regulating blood sugar. If blood sugar is elevated, the pancreas will release insulin to promote the transport of glucose into cells and promotes the synthesis of glycogen, fats, and proteins. If blood sugar is too low, the pancreas will release glucagon and stimulate the breakdown of glycogen into glucose and tells the liver to release glucose into the blood. Next, we have our sex hormones. In females, the ovaries are responsible for producing estrogens and progesterone. Estrogens promote the development of female reproductive organs and secondary sex characteristics. Estrogen and progesterone together are responsible for regulating the menstrual cycle and breast development. In males, the testes are responsible for producing testosterone. Testosterone promotes the development of male reproductive organs and the development of secondary male sex characteristics. Now we'll start looking at the histology images of different glands. Each slide will have a microscope image and a regular image. We will use the microscope image to identify the tissue and the regular image to identify the structures that make up the tissue. On the practical, you will need to be able to identify the different glands and specific structures or cells found in the tissue. First, we have the thyroid gland. It is made up of colloid-filled cells here. That is the lighter pink structures in the image. And then the follicular cells here, the dark purple structures. The colloid-filled follicles are going to store our thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, and the follicular cells are going to determine thyroid function. And here is another image of the thyroid. So the light pink here is going to be your colloid-filled follicles, and the dark purple cells here are going to be your follicular cells. Here we have the parathyroid gland. Remember that the parathyroid gland is on the dorsal or back side of the thyroid. On the microscope image here, the parathyroid is the dark purple region towards the bottom, and the light pink is going to be your thyroid. Within the parathyroid, we have oxyphil cells and parathyroid cells. Oxyphil cells are the large white areas that surround the dark blue parathyroid cells. Here's another image of the parathyroid. Then here we have the anterior pituitary gland. On the microscope images, the anterior pituitary is the darker pink area on the right side of the image. The lighter pink here will be the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary gland contains more nuclei, and because of that, when it's stained, it ends up being darker. In our anterior pituitary, there are three types of cells. We have eosinophils, chromophobes, and basophils. Eosinophils are the dark, almost black areas and secrete growth hormone and prolactin. Chromophobes are the lighter blue, almost white area here, and do not secrete any hormones. Lastly, we have our basophils, which is the dark blue, and it will secrete our tropic hormones LH, FSH, ACTH, and TSH. Also note that the anterior pituitary gland does not have any nervous tissue present, while the posterior pituitary does. And we'll see that again in a second. So here is our posterior pituitary gland. It does have nervous tissue. You can see that with the neuron axons and nuclei, just like we saw in Anatomy 1. The microscope images are the same as the previous slide. Just note that the posterior pituitary is on the left side and it's the lighter pink area. So it's this down here. This is the thymus. An easy way to identify the thymus is to look for the lighter pink areas within the dark blue or dark purple area. These are called the hallux corpuscles, and they can be used to help you identify the tissue on your exam. You don't need to know what the hallux corpuscles do. Just know that this here, these lighter pink areas surrounded by the darker purple, are those that'll help you identify the thymus. The most important thing to remember about the thymus is that it functions in the immune system, and this is where the maturation of our T cells, a type of immune cell, occurs. Here is the adrenal gland. If you remember looking at the skin in Anatomy 1, this image is very similar, as it is broken down into different zones or layers. The adrenal gland is going to have 5 specific zones. On this image, the most superficial layers at the top and the deepest layers at the bottom. So from deep to superficial, we have the adrenal medulla, the zona reticularis, the zona fasciculata, the zona glomerulosa, and finally we have the capsule, which will surround everything. And again, on the microscope image here, you can see the different layers of the adrenal gland. You will not need to be able to identify the layers on the microscope image, but you will need to be able to identify them on this image here. Here we have the pancreas. The pink image here, the bigger one, is the pancreatic islet. The pancreatic islet is an area of cells that contain insulin and glucagon within the pancreas. The pancreas is a special organ because it contains cells with endocrine system function and exocrine system function. Endocrine cells are going to secrete substances, in this case hormones, directly into the bloodstream. Exocrine cells secrete substances onto an epithelial surface using a duct. The endocrine cells within the pancreatic islet are called alpha cells and beta cells. Alpha cells are the dark stained pink areas here and produce glucagon. And the beta cells are the lighter pink ones down here and will produce insulin. On the outside of the islet, we have our exocrine pancreatic acinar cells. In the microscope image here, the pancreatic islets are the lighter stain areas, like right here, over here, and there's a couple up here. And then we surround it by the dark purple of the purple exocrine cells. And here's another image of that. So this here is an islet's in here, and it's going to be surrounded by the exocrine cells. So this is the ovary. The main characteristic to see here is the eyeball-like structure called the primary follicle. Within the primary follicle down here, we have an oocyte. An oocyte is an immature egg cell. And then lastly, we have the testes. The main characteristics here are that the white lumen in the middle is surrounded by a layer of purple spermatates and spermatocytes that will later develop into mature sperm cells. Lastly, we have the testes. The main characteristic here are that the white lumen areas in here, and in here, and in here are going to be surrounded by spermatates and spermatocytes that will develop into mature sperm cells. So now we'll look at some of the endocrine homeostatic imbalances. That just means that something in the endocrine system is out of balance. We can have either hyposecretion, meaning that we are not secreting enough of the hormone, or hypersecretion, meaning too much is being secreted. So for growth hormone in children, if it's being hyposecreted, they will develop pituitary dwarfism, which result in a short stature, but all the other normal proportions will be normal. If the growth hormone is being hypersecreted in children, you will have gigantism, they will be abnormally tall. Or if growth hormone becomes hypersecreted in adults, you will develop acromegaly, which is an abnormally large bones of the face, feet, and hands. If ADH is being hyposecreted, an individual will develop diabetes insipidus, and that's a condition characterized by the thirst and excessive urine output. If ADH is being hypersecreted, you will develop the syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion, and that's just a condition characterized by fluid retention. It'll present with headaches and disorientation. The thyroid hormones, if they are being hyposecreted in children, will develop cretinism, which is a mental retardation with a disproportionately short-sized body. And in adults, you will develop myxedema, which is a low metabolic rate, edema, and physical and mental sluggishness. If thyroid hormone is being hypersecreted, you would develop Graves' disease, which is an elevated metabolic rate, sweating rate, and irregular heart rate, increased weight loss, protrusion of the eyeballs, and an extreme sense of nervousness. If the parathyroid hormones are being hyposecreted, you would develop hypoparathyroidism, which is a neural excitability with tetany, which is just muscle spasms, and convulsions. Hyperparathyroidism is a loss of calcium from bones, causing deformation and spontaneous fractures. If insulin is being hyposecreted, you will develop diabetes mellitus, or what you commonly refer to as diabetes, which is an inability of the cell to take up and utilize glucose, and then a loss glucose in the urine. If insulin is being hypersecreted, you will develop hypoglycemia, which results in low blood sugar and is characterized by anxiety, nervousness, tremors, and weakness. So look at this chart pretty closely. This will definitely be on your exam. An example test question could be if a patient is hypoglycemic, what hormone is being hyper secreted? That would be insulin. Or if you have a patient that has Graves' disease, thyroid hormone is being hypo or hyper secreted. Which one is it? Graves' disease is a hyper secretion of thyroid hormone. And then now let's take a closer look at aldosterone specifically. Normal effects of aldosterone are that it increases blood levels of sodium and water by increasing sodium and water reabsorption at the kidney. And also it decreases blood potassium levels by increasing excretion of potassium at the kidney. If aldosterone is being hyposecreted, which means there's not enough aldosterone, blood levels will decrease. Blood levels of sodium and water will decrease, and you'll have an increased level of blood potassium. If aldosterone is being hypersecreted, meaning there's too much aldosterone, you will see an increased blood levels of sodium and water and decreased levels of blood potassium. And then here is a closer look at the effects of the thyroid hormone. Normally, thyroid hormones affect your metabolism, your body temp, your weight, heart rate, skeletal muscles, and integumentary system, so your skin, and your respiratory system. If your thyroid hormone is being hyposecreted, again, hypo meaning not enough, you will have a decrease in your metabolism, decrease in your core body temperature, and your ability to tolerate cold weather. You will see an increase in weight gain, a decrease in your heart rate. Your skeletal muscles will become weak and look untoned. Your integumentary system will have some dysfunction, so you'll have coarse hair and rough and dry skin, and you will have a decreased respiration rate. If thyroid hormone is being hypersecreted, so too much of the hormone, you will see an increased metabolism, increased body temp, and a decreased ability to withstand hot temperatures. You will see an increased weight loss. You will see an increase in your heart rate. You will have weak muscles that exhibit tremors. You will have soft, smooth hair and skin. You will have an increased respiration rate. Right. So that's it for this lecture, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. I kept it pretty short. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email and we will go over this again in class. See you guys then.